This video was made possible thanks to my amazing patrons at patreon.com/magicalhacker. If you're not a patron and you would like me to make a video for you each month using your decks, become a patron today. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Grim Backwoods. This is a live podcast where I'm here on YouTube and on Twitch talking to you awesome people about a interesting, topic related to Magic, related to Commander. I always enjoy these episodes. This is technically the second episode, so I haven't been doing this for very long, but, there's a couple of times I've done something similar to this, so again, I always love doing these, and I hope you guys are excited for the topic that we've got for today. Really want to say a huge thank you to Unsummoned Skull for the raid, for Delta Fiend for the follow. Really appreciate you guys. Let's go ahead and talk about the topic for today. And as we go through this, feel free to post your thoughts on what I'm talking about here in the chat. And that way, we can kind of talk about the things that you're saying too. So if you ever wanted to be on podcast, but you're maybe not feeling like you want to be on the audio, or maybe sometimes you can't make it, this is a great place to be, where you can talk about what you feel like when you come and join. And then I will definitely address your comments, your questions as we go through this. So I posted on Twitter, which, by the way, if you do want to follow me on Twitter, that's magical__hacker. I asked this question: pick my next topic for Grim Backwoods, my brand new live podcast where I discuss interesting things with whoever comes to watch it live. If you want to watch episode 1, I've got the link there. But the one that won here was why Tergrid is the new Narset. And if you're wondering, those other topics are going to be addressed in future episodes, but I had a list of things I wanted to do, and I was like, okay, what are people really interested in? And Tergrid definitely won there. So Tergrid, Narset, what do they have in common? Let's go ahead and start by breaking this down, looking at Narset Enlightened Master first, because this is a lot older. This is from Khans of Tarkir. Unsummoned Soul says, thanks for the shout out. Sorry, I messed up the raid. I missed the underscore. Hey, no worries. It is all good. I'm glad that you're here, and I'm excited for this episode. So Narset Enlightened Master, back from Khans of Tarkir. It's a 6-mana, 3/2 human monk with First Strike and Hexproof. This is whenever Narset Enlightened Master attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. So you could get up to 4 free, huge non-creature spells for free with Narset. And the fact that, this commander has Hexproof makes it even harder to deal with it. Now, there is a little bit of a safety valve, I guess you could say, because you have to attack with Narset. It doesn't just happen for free. So you do have to attack, which, because she's a creature, means that you normally are going to have to wait around the table before you can attack with Narset, unless you've got Haste Enablers. So let's talk about first why Narset is a scary commander. And these types of commanders like Narset, like Tergrid, Bref in here says, Narset, the, quote, no, my deck isn't broken commander. Yeah, it'll happen sometimes where she's just so powerful that even though she's also open-ended, where maybe you wanted to play an Enchantress build with Narset. Maybe you wanted to do instant tribal, or you wanted to play a bunch of, want to do a Spellslinger deck or something. You could do all those things with Narset, but because of that open-endedness and that power level, you can do something a lot worse with her than what maybe would be more fun. And the two things that you can do with Narset is, once you attack, if in the top 4 cards of your library, you got either a card that allows you to get an extra combat, or you have a card that allows you to get an extra turn, either one of those two effects will allow you to reset Narset and continue that combo, that infinite combo, which is not truly infinite because eventually you'll run out of cards in your deck. But the fact that you're getting like maybe 10 or 15 turns in a row, you've essentially won the game at that point. There's really not much that your opponents can do to stop that, avalanche of value. So I've got a couple of examples here. We've got Aggravated Assault, which, yes, you do have to pay the 5 mana for, but if you can get that down for free, Narset basically allows you to turn extra turns into additional combats as well. So Aggravated Assault can kind of do double duty there, just really adding to your ability to churn through your deck with Narset. Alrund's Epiphany, that's a pretty new one from Kaldheim that does the same thing, allows you to get an extra turn. Beacon of Tomorrows, Breath of Fury doesn't really work, but still one of those types of effects. Capture of Jingzhou is one that you'll probably see a lot. Expropriate, pretty famous for the kind of craziness things, crazy things it can do in Commander. Fury of the Horde, very, very specific to Narset decks. Not a lot of other decks are playing it. But it is a good card. But yeah, it's very specific to Narset decks in a lot of situations. So you can see a lot of options here. Extra turns, extra combats. Those two types of effects allow Narset to say, when Narset Enlightened Master attacks, you win the game. There's a couple of extra steps in there, but essentially, that's what it says. So I did talk about a little bit about how Narset, you do need to attack with it. Breffin here mentions, you could show me the entire deck trying to show me it's not like Armageddon and cast your deck tribal, and I'll still target the Narset player first. So much value, and I figure I probably missed something. Yeah, we're actually going to talk about that exact point towards the end of this podcast. I don't know how long it's going to be. It might be a little bit shorter than some of the other episodes I want to do, but that's fine. Definitely a topic that I don't mind just knocking out and then maybe, having some fun talking with you. Clicky says, "Hey, please distract me." Well, I will be your distraction for tonight. Hopefully you will enjoy this distraction as well. So yes, Narset Enlightened Master, I did talk about that safety valve being the fact that she has to attack. However, you're playing red. Red's got a lot of ways to give creatures haste. You've got Ashling's Prerogative, Fervor, even Footfall Crater, which technically you have to use an additional land on top of what you're using to cast Narset. Hammer of Perforos, Lightning Greaves. There are a lot of cards that can give Narset haste. And that combination of haste, hexproof, and that ability can really make Narset very, very tough to deal with. Up to the point where, in order to deal with her, you've got to use a specific type of approach, a specific type of a strategy. And again, we'll talk about that towards the end here. Clicky says, "My foot is the size of a rugby ball right now." Wow, that sounds very painful. Clicky, did you know that I had broken my right ankle maybe about 2 or 3 years ago? So it's still pretty recent. I had actually broken it after I had started my content. So if you look through some of my older videos, you'll see me talking about how the medications that I was taking for the pain was making me not quite so fast at playing the gameplay. But that's fine. That's just how it works sometimes. But I do hope that you recover very quickly and you recover soon, and hopefully you don't have the same issues that I had. I actually had gotten pretty bad neuropathy where my toes felt like they were on fire just 24/7. Breffin here says, "Don't do that, Clicky. Be more careful with yourself." You never know. It could be a mistake. It was an accident for me. I had tripped and twisted my ankle to the point where I broke 2 bones. But that's a story for a different time. We're going to focus here on Narset Enlightened Master. So, Narset, very, very scary. How does this really relate to Tergrid? I mean, if you look at the commander here, it's not the same. It has no colors in combination with it. It has a completely different type of color identity. It's monocolored, whereas Narset was, tricolored. So what's the difference here? What's Tergrid all about? So Tergrid, if I can go ahead and read this one off here. Tergrid is a new commander. This comes from Kaldheim. On the front side, she's a 5-mana legendary 4/5 god with menace that says, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. On the backside here, 4 mana for a legendary artifact that you can tap to make target player lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And then, kind of surprisingly, 4 mana to simply untap Tergrid's Lantern. So a pretty scary card on the back and on the front. But what again does this, what's the connection to Narset? Clicky says you can do white sack. I guess you're talking maybe about if you want to do something between the two. That is possibly an option. But with Tergrid here, we've only got black as our options. So where does Tergrid kind of fall? Narset had the ability that I kind of summarized by saying whenever you attack, you win the game. I feel like the best way to put Tergrid is whenever you cast another spell, you win the game. And I'll explain why I say that here. If you've got cards like Awaken the Erstwhile or Dark Deal, or even stuff like Death Cloud, if you can make everybody discard their hands, or you make people sacrifice their creatures and lands, those types of effects are really going to put you so much farther ahead than your opponents that it's going to be pretty much impossible for them to recover from that. So let's just put this into perspective. You get down Tergrid, you follow it up with a Dark Deal, everybody discards their hand, they discarded a bunch of permanent cards, you get a bunch of lands into play for free, you get a bunch of creatures, enchantments, artifacts into play for free, then maybe with all those lands that you get onto the battlefield that are extra, you then follow it up with a Death Cloud for X = 2. With those, with that ability on the stack, you sacrifice a bunch of your creatures that you just got with a discard, the ones that don't really matter. You make opponents lose life. They sacrifice 3 lands, or 2 lands, I think I said here, X equals 2. They sacrifice 2 lands. Now you're 6 mana ahead. You get those back onto the battlefield, and you can keep chaining these types of effects through, with each other. You can then follow it up with a Torment of Hailfire, or maybe a Smallpox, maybe a Pox itself. So there are a lot of things you can do with this commander, where essentially, once you cast one of these really, really big spells, something that can make each opponent sacrifice lands, sacrifice creatures, discard cards, once you get something like that with Tergrid on the battlefield, you're going to be so much farther ahead than your opponents. I really feel like your chances of losing at that point are, within the single digits. It's really, really easy to win from that point. Breffin says, we've had a few other must-kill or lose promptly commanders, Neheb 2.0 for instance, or even Zada. Those are great examples to bring up. I do feel like with Neheb and with Zada, it is a little bit more, it is a little, not quite so straightforward, whereas Narset, it really does feel like once she attacks, you're very unlikely to win. I think Tergrid kind of fits into that category, whereas Neheb, Zada, you still have plenty of mana. You still have plenty of turns to keep doing stuff. So it can kind of be a bit of an issue. Neheb, I do see what you're saying. You can use those extra combats to get a little bit of a similar, play pattern as Narset, but not quite so bad as Narset. Whereas Tergrid, I think, is on a completely different axis. And so it's a nice comparison there where you can talk about, this is not even doing the same thing, and yet it kind of fits into the same category. So Tergrid can do these things. Now you might be wondering, okay, how realistic is this? Whereas with Narset, you could get a Haste Enabler earlier on a turn, pay 6 mana, cast the Narset. To go for Tergrid with Dark Deal at the same time, that's 8 mana, right? And that's one of the cheaper options. A lot of these other ones are even more expensive. Even Smallpox, right? You're trying to go for one of the cheaper options so you can get 3 lands and maybe go into a bigger thing. That's still 7 mana. Getting 7 mana is pretty tough to do. It's not like you're just gonna, roll over and bam, you got 7 black mana. Benjamin Carter here from the YouTube stream says, Tergrid requires an immediate response. You cannot allow an opponent to untap with Tergrid on the board. That's exactly my the point that I'll be making here towards the end, and I'm going to kind of go through why that's the case, and maybe a couple of other applications as well for that type of approach. So yeah, Tergrid can do this, but we need to have a lot of mana, at least 7 mana, and that's if we're going for Smallpox. If we're going for something else, we might need 8 mana or more. Well, that's where the fact that she's mono black comes into play. You see, you can use cards like Nirkana Revenant, Crypt Gas, Bubbling Muck, Dark Ritual, Culling the Weak, Cage Sun, even Extra Planar Lens, all these types of effects, and there's plenty more that I didn't pull up on this search, just to give you an example of a few. There are a lot of ways to really ramp out a lot of mana way earlier than your opponents are expecting. And so that's, I think, something that's going to be pretty important. You might be looking at Nirkana Revenant and say, okay, well, that doesn't really count because that costs more than Tergrid. But if we're trying to go for having 8 mana, Nirkana Revenant might work with 4 swamps to get us there. If we have a Dark Ritual in hand, we can then get Nirkana Revenant out on turn 5 or on turn 4 or turn 3, potentially, because we can have 3 mana. Dark Ritual, maybe we have a Soul Ring or something along those lines, or a Mana Crypt, or even just a 2-drop Mana Rock. And that will produce the 6 mana that we'll need for the Nirkana Revenant to go for a turn 4 Tergrid plus Pox plus Smallpox plus a couple of other options that we talked about there. Dark Deal. So yeah, it's pretty easy in mono black to get Tergrid out and another spell a lot faster, even faster than Narset. Which, yes, Narset has the hexproof, and you can still ramp her out as well. And Tergrid does not have that, but it is a little bit more straightforward. All you got to have is that one spell in hand. Whereas with Narset, there is those times where you're going to attack with Narset and just reveal 4 lands off the top of your deck, and that's going to stop your combo, and you're not going to be able to keep going. Doesn't happen too often. I mean, that's still pretty low chances, but it will happen every now and then. Whereas with Tergrid, you got that card in hand. You know what you're going to go for afterwards, and so it's a little bit less risky, I would say, than Narset in a couple of ways. In other ways, it's more risky. In some ways, it's less risky. Griffin says, you could pre-set up for Tergrid, Mind Slicer, and a sack outlet in play, and then sack the Mind Slicer. That's a very good point. Let me pull up the Mind Slicer here. Mind Slicer. This is another card that will make every opponent discard their hand. It's going to make you discard your hand as well, but if you're getting all those things for free and nobody has any answers in their hand anymore, that's got to be pretty good. It's going to be pretty tough to get around something along those lines. So that's where Mind Slicer kind of falls into play. So Narset, Tergrid, the thing they both have in common is while they don't technically say they have a triggered ability that makes you win the game, if the deck is built in a specific way, which is the best way to build it, if you're trying to be, make the deck as strong as possible, it essentially will say that. It will say when you yada 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 do something specific, you win the game. Clicky says, did I mention, aside from my soul and foot, I also got electrocuted. Don't know what I did, but Lady Luck hates me right now. Well, that sounds pretty unfortunate. I'm going to go ahead. I don't have an emote for that, do I? That's probably the horrible thing to say as a Twitch streamer. But I hope that your luck turns around. I hate to go for the gambler's fallacy, but hey, if you've had that bad luck up till now, that means that you're about to have some good luck happening to you. That's the way I look at it, to try to stay positive, because I think a positive attitude is going to make a huge, huge difference. So, like I said, Clicky, I'm wishing you a fast and good recovery from your injuries. So that's where I think Narset and Tergrid kind of overlap. We've got two commanders that are going to be very, very difficult to deal with once they hit the battlefield because of those abilities, and in the best deck, they're going to be making you win the game. So what do? I mean, if we're looking at Narset, is this even a deck that people build, right? Do people build the highest version deck? Because I could talk about all day long, Narset's decks are going to be you built this way, built that way, but maybe people just want to do it in the funner way. They don't want to actually go for the broken version. Well, let's take a look at what EDH Rec has to say. Extra turn, extra turn, extra turn, extra turn. Omniscience, which isn't technically an extra turn, but really allows you to cast those little extra turns from your hand for free. Extra combat, extra turn, turn. Extra combat, extra turn. Yeah, so we can see a lot of ways that really do get Narset down exactly as we said. That is going to be a big deck trying to go for that instant win. Well, let's take a look at Tergrid. Maybe Tergrid is built differently. Let's take a look. If we look over here, each opponent discards a card. Each opponent loses 6 life unless they discard 2 cards. Each opponent discards a card. This is an opposition, which is not, it doesn't matter for this category, but we can look here. Smallpox, Dark Deal. We've got Soul Shatter, where everybody sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. We've got that Death Cloud again. So yeah, we can see Tergrid is also built exactly how we mentioned. We've got a lot of things in here that are making each opponent discard all the cards from their hand, multiple cards from their hand, making them sacrifice lands, sacrifice creatures. So Tergrid and Narset are both potentially built in this way where you can win very easily once they actually stick onto the battlefield. And on top of that, those are both kind of the most popular ways to build both those commanders. So now I'm going to do something that I think a lot of people probably have not seen yet. Benjamin Carter here says, cards with continuous impacts that can be played before Tergrid, like Chains of Mephistopheles, are fantastic. Liliana is another example. Yeah, so if we look up the Chain of Mephistopheles, this is a card that I really enjoy playing. It is kind of a shame that it's on the reserve list, and it's $1,400. But thankfully, I play on Magic Online where it's only 48 cents. So it's less than half $1. And so we can use this one. It basically says this: if a player would draw a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, that player discards a card instead. If the player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If the player doesn't discard a way, they mill a card. Discard a card this way, rather. So this is basically a card where it allows you to continue to draw extra cards, but you have to discard cards first. If you can't even do that, instead of even drawing that card, you mill it. So that's the idea behind Chains of Mephistopheles. If you get this out there with a Dark Deal, you will allow your opponents to draw all those cards, trigger the Chain of Mephistopheles for each one of those cards, and then they'll have to discard them again. And so it's going to be pretty tough to actually get that. And it might even make them mill those cards instead. I think that might be actually the way it works with Dark Deal. But regardless, it still makes sure that your opponents have 0 cards in hand from the Dark Deal itself. So, Narset, Tergrid, both a problem. Well, why is that an issue, right? If you wanted to play these decks, isn't that a great thing? I mean, your deck is going to be super, super powerful. How could that possibly be bad? I know it could be bad as an opponent, but I think it's also bad to play this deck. And let me show you why. So I have a video here. This is absolutely my favorite TED Ed video of all time. You've heard of TED Talks. This is similar, except this is a kind of an animated video where they show something, and like I said, this is my favorite, and because the reason for it is because it applies super well to any situation where you're playing a multiplayer game where people have some amount of information about the deck that you're playing, or about what version or what option you have brought to the table. So it doesn't apply to poker, it doesn't apply to a couple of other areas, but it does apply to Commander, multiplayer Commander, and I'll show why. So I don't have the audio here because obviously I don't have any problems, but I do have the captions on here, so I'll go ahead and read this off here. You've been chosen as a champion to represent your wizarding house in a deadly duel against 2 rival magic schools. Your opponents are fearsome. From the Nunitz school, a powerful sorcerer wields a wand that can turn people into fish, but his spell only works 70% of the time. And from the Leibton school, an even more powerful enchantress wields a wand that turns people to statues, and it works 90% of the time. Lots are drawn, and you're chosen to cast the first spell in the duel. The Nunitz magician will go second, and the Leibton enchantress third, after which you'll repeat casting in that order until only one of you is left. The rules of magic duels are strict, and anyone who casts out of order immediately forfeits the duel. Also, to prevent draws, the rules stipulate that if everyone's still standing at the end of the first round, you'll all be turned into cats. Now, you must choose a wand. Your wizarding house presents you with 3 options. The Banneker, which binds one target with vines, and casts effectively 60% of the time. The Gaussian, which turns one target into a tree, and works 80% of the time. And the incredibly rare Neuther 9000, which banishes one target to a distant mountaintop and casts perfectly 100% of the time. Your opponents are masters of strategy as well as sorcery, and you'll know that they'll make the choices that maximize their own chances of success. Which wand should you choose, and what strategy should you employ to have the greatest chance of winning the duel? Pause the video now if you want to figure it out for yourself. And I'll go ahead and pause this video here, because if you are someone that wants to try to figure this out and you want to come back to the stream, what I recommend doing is I'm going to go ahead and copy this, post this in the chat here, so that if you'd like to watch it later, maybe not seeing the answer here, if you want, this is something that I do occasionally with other streams that I watch from time to time. I'll pause it, go do something that I'm interested in, and then come back and press play and put the stream speed up to either 1.25 or 1.5 times, and that way eventually I do catch up to it being live, but I can kind of, in this situation, you'd be able to try to guess your answer, do a little bit of math, figure out what you would like to do, and then come back to the stream. So for those of you that have left, that's good. For those of you that want to see the answer, let's go ahead and jump into the answer in 3, 2, 1. You reach for the Neuther 9000 first. After all, it makes sense to enter the duel with the most powerful wand, right? But before you pick it up, you consider what would happen. As the most dangerous wizard, you'd also be the target of the other 2 magicians, and you'd need to take care of the most dangerous of them first. But afterward, there's a 70% chance you'd be struck down by the remaining wizard. That's pretty bad. That's trouble. Maybe it's better to take the Gaussian, you think. It works 80% of the time, which means that you wouldn't be a target until the enchantress was incapacitated. But if you succeeded in transforming her, you'd probably be turned into a fish immediately after. If you transformed the sorcerer, the enchantress would almost certainly turn you into a statue. So it would probably be better if you missed, right? That's when you have an idea. What if you took the Gaussian but then missed on purpose? Then you could wait for the sorcerer to attack the enchantress, and you'd have an 80% chance of winning against the sorcerer. It's a good idea, but there is a problem. The sorcerer could also pass his turn by missing, and the enchantress, knowing that she couldn't pass without becoming a cat, would have to cast her spell on one of you. If she did that, since you're the most dangerous between you and the sorcerer, you'd be the target, and you'd likely lose this battle 90% of the time. So maybe the better strategy is to take the weakest wand, the Banneker, and then on top of that miss on purpose. Now the sorcerer knows that he'll be targeted by the enchantress if he purposely misses, and he'll have to try to turn her into a fish to avoid being turned into stone. 70% of the chance he'll succeed, and then you'd have a 60% chance of winning on the next round. If he fails, though, chances that he'll be turned into stone, and you'd still have a 60% chance of winning the duel against the enchantress. There's a slim 3% chance that you'll all be turned into cats, but when everything's accounted for, you'd have a better than even odds of winning with this strategy. And that's the best that you can do. Here's the full list of all the possibilities. And I'm going to go and leave it paused on here in case you were interested on what you decide to do. This is definitely the best strategy. If you take, on purpose, you take the worst wand, and then on top of that, you specifically don't use it. You try to have a 0% effectiveness the first time that you have it out there, and then try to ramp up to 60% effectiveness. That's going to be the best thing for you. So let's say that we're trying to take this analogy and compare it to what we've been talking about, Narset and Tergrid. Narset and Tergrid are like the incredibly rare Noither 9000. They don't miss, all right? They hit 100% of the time. If you can get that, you get it online, it is going to win you the game almost 100% of the time. And so the thing is, we have to anticipate our opponents to be masters of strategy as well. I always talk about this in my videos. I always think it's better to anticipate your opponents being better than they actually are. Because if you anticipate them being worse than they actually are, then you're likely not doing the best thing in that situation. If they're not going to be as good, that's going to give you some other chances to kind of catch up. But if they're the best, you want to make sure that you're doing everything. You're trying to keep your lines as clean and as simple as possible. Now, obviously, this is not including when your only out is if they miss something. And so you're saying, okay, well, my only out is if they don't play this correctly. So I'm going to try to play it as though that's what they're going to do. That's a different story. But in most situations, you're going to want to make sure that you're anticipating your opponent doing the best thing for what they want to do. And that's what they did in this video, and I think that's the right way to say it, to take it. So let's say you're looking, you maybe have not built a Tergrid deck, maybe you haven't built a Narset deck, and you're thinking, man, should I build one of these? I mean, this seems pretty good. It's very powerful, but no. I think, and this has been kind of alluded to by Benjamin Carter here, by Breffin, maybe by a few others here in the chat, the best thing to do is to not play them. Because if you do play them, you are putting not just 2 opponents, like we have in this analogy, but 3 opponents in a position where they realize if they don't take care of you before you become a problem, when you become a problem, they won't be able to take care of you anymore. And so that's the kind of situation you're putting yourself into. If you like playing games where you don't do anything and you lose, then play Tergrid, play Narset. That's the best. Those are the best commanders for that. But I can't think of anybody who wants to go into a game and say, man, I hope I do nothing in this game and then lose because everybody's afraid of what I can do. Then that's Tergrid, that's Narset, those are the commanders you want to be playing. So that's the way to look at it if you are the one playing it. Now, if your opponent is playing it, you want to make sure that you kind of put them into the situation, because again, a lot of players might say, I'm playing an Aristocrats deck. I'm playing, let's say, Krav and Regna. That's my Aristocrats deck I have for my channel. I'm playing Aristocrats deck, and there's an opponent out there. They've got a pretty scary commander. They've got Anafenza. I think it's Anafenza. I can't remember the rest of the card, but let's say, there it is, Anafenza the Foremost. All right, this is a commander that says, the second ability, if a non-token creature an opponent owns would die, or a creature card not on the battlefield will be put into an opponent's graveyard, exile that card instead. So Anafenza the Foremost, it shuts my deck down. Why should I go after the Tergrid player or the Narset player? I need to go after the Anafenza player because their deck shuts my deck down. I can't do anything, right? That's what a lot of players might think. They might be in a situation where that's what they want to do. Well, here's the better way to do it. If you're an opponent, you're playing against Narset or Tergrid, you've got to convince the other players at the table, look, if that player gets their commander out there, they might not be playing a scary deck. They might not be. But the commander itself is so powerful that the best version of the deck would allow them to win the game if they basically cast their commander and then do one other thing. And it's going to be such a simple thing, as simple as casting a spell or as attacking with the commander. It's super easy for them to just run away with the game if they got the scariest version of the deck. That's how powerful that commander is. You've got to convince your opponents that's the best strategic choice to make so that you can then make sure that you don't lose to that commander deck. If you don't do that, you might have a chance where all your opponents already agree on that. You don't have to bring it up. But there might be a chance that they don't think that way. Again, they might be more interested in attacking each other. Anafenza versus the Aristocrats player. They're going to go one-on-one with each other. Then you're definitely going to lose to the Tergrid or the Narset player because they're going to be spending so many resources on each other. They don't realize that Tergrid or Narset, they're just going to run away with the game almost immediately. Breffin here says, one could argue with Narset that the game has sped up too much for Narset in her normal power bracket. That's also a possibility. I have heard people talking about Commander being faster now than ever before. But I still think with Narset, she's going to get advantages with all that speeding up, that's going to make her even scarier too. So I would still say that Narset is still pretty powerful. People are still playing. People are maybe including more counter spells, which is one way to deal with Narset. That might be one reason Narset might not be as good, but I still think that Narset and Tergrid both fall into that category if this goes unchecked, it wins the game, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And so that's where I put those two. So yes, I think the way to do it, if you're playing as an opponent against these decks, you've got to make your opponents understand how scary those opponents' commanders are. So let's give a real life example, right? You're playing Tergrid, God of Fright, and you've got three opponents here: Bergi, God of Storytelling; Essica, God of the Tree; and Valki, God of Lies. Now, Bergi here on the backside is Harmful Horn of Bounty, really great card. Essica on the back, the Prismatic Bridge, also a really fantastic card. Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, look at this, a really great card here. If your opponents think, okay, I'm the Prismatic Bridge, I don't want Tybalt to gain my spells because I've got some really good spells in here. Harnfell might say, look, I need to deal with that Prismatic Bridge. If that comes down, I'm not going to be able to stop it. I need to deal with that right away. Tybalt might say, look, Harnfell can storm off, and I could just be dead immediately. I need to deal with that. So everybody might be looking at each other and saying, okay, that person's the biggest threat. But none of these opponents are going to, in the same spell, get rid of their ability to respond to things with cards in their hand. Get rid of their mana that they have in order to use to get rid of things. And on top of that, pull a whole bunch of threats onto the table pretty much immediately. The only thing that can do that in this situation is Tergrid. That's why Tergrid is still a bigger threat than all three of these decks here at the table. So, Tergrid, if you're a Tergrid player, I've heard people saying, I just built Tergrid in case somebody comes around with a deck that's way too powerful, and they're trying to pub stomp, and I'm saying, okay, well, I got my deck ready to go against them. That might still not be enough because, again, like I said, if you're playing against a Tergrid player, even if someone's playing a really powerful Prismatic Bridge deck, Tergrid's still a bigger threat. So I don't know if Tergrid is going to really change things all that much for when you're playing against the pub stomper. And so I feel like that's why Tergrid, every way you slice it, it's not a very successful deck because of the way that game theory works. It's not a very fun deck to play because all your opponents are going to try to be killing you before you can do anything scary. And then on top of that, it's not going to be a deck that's going to allow your opponents to make deals with you. I always say this, don't make deals with the devil, and I think that's the way to think about it. You have to think about it that way. Refn Carter says, in CEDH, all decks are as scary as Tergrid. In EDH, few decks are as consistently scary. I think that's a fantastic point. And one thing that I do like to mention every now and then is, while CEDH and Commander both have the same rule set, they're very different. In a lot of ways, I think the best way to understand what CEDH is, it's built with a house rule in mind that says this: no one is allowed to bring anything that's not scary. You have to bring something that's scary if you're playing CEDH. Your deck has to be so good at shutting down other decks, or so good at just winning the game almost immediately, that's why you're playing CEDH. That's what the decks are all about, the format's all about. Commander, there is real merit in playing something that's not as good, right? If we go back to this, analogy here, imagine that instead of the other players playing a 70% and a 90%, both of them were playing 100% wands, right? You're still going to want to be playing a 100% wand. In that situation, it's not going to be as much value to be playing a 60% wand or an 80% wand. Maybe a 90%, but not a 100% wand. You want to be playing something super a lot lower than that. You want to get as close to that as possible. So that's where I think this analogy kind of comes into play. Now, I did mention game theory. If you're like me and you like math, I know, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I love math, and I love looking at game theory. Now, this is not that YouTube channel where, it's the YouTube series where they go through games and they talk about the scientific theories behind it. This is something different. This is game theory. This is a branch of mathematics, where you're looking, I like to think of it as you're looking about how multiplayer situations work. Everybody's trying to do what's best for them, and they're going to be responding to each other based on what they're doing. And so I like game theory. If you want to look more into that, I highly recommend doing that here. I guess that puts me into Quandrix, right? If that's what I like to do, then that's the Strixhaven college that I'm going to be in. Breffin here says, of course, the power level with Tergrid is that your opponents need to have an answer in a very short window of time. They can come gunning for you, but not if you can get the Tergrid payoffs the turn Tergrid resolves. Deal making still isn't something I get out of in EDH. Yeah, so Brevin, I think you're making some pretty good points. He says here, Tergrid is a greater than 100% wand. You fire with wand with a chance that both your opponents will drop their wand. I think that's a good way to look at it. There are some limitations to that analogy, but I do like that a lot, where you can use that as a way to understand, how to play in Commander and what choices to make. But yeah, I do agree with you here. Like I said, with Narset, with Tergrid, you're putting your opponents in a situation where if they're going to be the best opponents that they can be, they're going to do what they need to do in order to have the best chance at winning. You're putting them in a situation where they have to kill you before they can do anything before you can do anything that will put you in a position where you can then maybe have a chance at winning. So I think that's the way to think about it. Game 3, like I said, I really like that one a lot. One other aspect here to mention, and this won't work as much with Narset because she's got hexproof, but it will work with Tergrid and with other commanders as well. I personally like to play at least 2 of these cards in my commander decks when possible. Imprison in the Moon, Song of the Dryads. These are both doing identically, almost the same thing. Obviously, Imprison in the Moon is a little bit more limited in what it can target. I like Oubliette a lot as well. Same thing with Darksteel Mutation. Essentially, these are what the cards I call are Neo-Tuck. So if you were playing Commander for a while, you'll remember back when we had Tuck card. Benjamin Carter says, "You beautiful mind." Are you talking to me or are you talking to Breffin? Because Breffin here says, especially since the other cards in Tergrid's 99 are the best at disrupting your opponent's hands anyways. I totally agree with you on that one, Breffin. But yes, these are cards that I call Neo-Tuck. If you've been playing Commander for a while, you'll remember back when we had Tuck cards. So if you haven't been playing for a while, let me kind of explain what happened. So back in the day, the Commander replacement rule didn't just say that, or let me say here, it did say that if your commander would die or if it would get exiled, then you can put it in the command zone instead. That was something that it said. It did not, however, say if it gets shuffled into your library, if it gets put into your library anywhere, or if it gets put into your hand, you can also put it into your command zone. That it did not say. And the reason that was such an important difference was back in the day, you could use effects like Chaos Warp, or you could use things...
Think God stays in heaven because he too lives in fear of what he's created?
Thank you so much for the follow this week in MTG. Really appreciate it. All the cards I like to use, says this week in MTG. Yes, these are the Neo-Tuck cards. So people would use things like Hinder, or Spell Crumple, or Chaos Warp, or... what was the other one? Something into Myth. Cast into Myth, I think it was called. A bunch of cards that would allow you to shuffle commanders in. And that was pretty much a way to get rid of commanders. If there was a problematic commander at the table, we didn't have Narset or Tergrid back then, but if you had a problematic commander at the table, like, let's say, Rafik, right? That was something that you did not want to see hitting the battlefield, getting Voltroned up, getting the hexproof, and just being impossible to deal with. If that was something that you wanted to get rid of, you could always Spell Crumple it, put it on the bottom of the opponent's library. And now, in order to get their commander back to a position where they can cast it, they have to either search their library, shuffle their library, and hope to draw into it, something along those lines. They had to do something in order to get their commander back. After that rule was kind of around for a while, people had gotten used to it, there was a change made that said, you know what, a lot of people have been feeling pretty bad when they're playing a janky deck, but someone's playing a more powerful deck, they can use one of these effects and shut down their commander, and now that player has no chance of winning. And so because of that, we're going to go ahead and change the rules so that tucking is not going to work anymore. If you try to shuffle opponent's commander into their deck, they can also put that into the command zone. And that's what happened. A lot of people were happy, myself included. A lot of people were happy about this. But a lot of people were pretty upset. They said, okay, well, how are we going to deal with those problematic commanders, right? How am I going to deal with that Rafik? I've got to have something that I can do with it. And here's the 4 cards that I think are great replacements to that. Now, some of you might be interested in other cards, but I like these 4, and I'll explain why here after I read a few messages here in the chat. Benjamin Carter says, Game 3 is pretty awesome. Brevin says, I like to use Ravnica Bounce Lands to save my commander from Imprisonment in the Moon. That said, these cards are slow for handling Tergrid, still good for your toolbox. Vigorous Shades says, back in the day with Hinder. Yes, I think did I mention that one? I thought I mentioned that one. Benjamin Carter here says that Gilded Drake works well too. That one is going to be a way that you can gain control of a commander. Gilded Drake. I'll pull that one up here in a second. And then This Week in MTG says, Ixodron is a personal favorite of mine that I like to toss in as well. So Gilded Drake, it's a creature that enters the battlefield for 2 mana, and you get to swap control with another creature. So the reason I like these 4 more than some of these other ones that I mentioned, Ixodron, Gilded Drake, and another one that I think a lot of people will also bring up is Kenra's Transformation, another one that people like, because it draws a card, it's only 2 mana. But the reason I like these 4 specifically is because almost every opponent's deck is going to be playing ways to destroy target creature or ways to destroy all creatures. So we got board wipes, we've got spot removal. You want to try to avoid having your opponent's decks being able to answer these very easily. Now, they're all enchantments, so enchantment removal will get rid of all of them. A couple of them will turn the commander into a land, so bounce lands will definitely work. Strip mine, effects like that will definitely work as well. But it definitely limits your opponent's ability to react, to respond. Dark's Mutation, a little bit of the problem there is if they happen to draw into a sack outlet, they can play the sack outlet, sack their commander. So Dark's Mutation is a little bit more limited there. Oubliette, a little bit strange because it phases an opponent's commander out. If they're playing a commander that already has phasing, which that doesn't happen, but you can maybe get around Oubliette. You can also make sure that they can't even target your commander. Whereas Imprison the Moon and Song of the Dryads and Dark's Mutation, if you don't cast them, but you put them onto the battlefield, let's say by returning them from the graveyard directly to the battlefield, because they're auras, you can just enchant them to something without actually targeting it as a spell on the stack. Oubliette can't do that. You still have to target it. So there's a couple of benefits for each one of these. Personally, my favorite in order is going from Song of the Dryads to Imprison in the Moon, Oubliette, and then finally Dark's Mutation. That's the order that I like if I have to choose. I don't like to include more than 2 of these effects in a deck because I don't want to have like 3 of them in my hand. It's like, okay, there's got to be at least one commander that I'm not that scared of here. This Week in MTG says, right, so fun. Vigorous Shades 15 says, Ixodron is ineffective against double-sided commanders, though, and that's a good point here. And Breffin mentions that as well, that it's a good point. But I think if you're playing against decks that are scary, and maybe you have a hard time convincing your opponents that those commanders are as scary as they are, or if maybe if your opponents are on the same page with you, these are really crucial spells to deal with them. Now, Breffin says you can't really use these effectively to deal with Tergrid. I would probably agree with you. They're not going to be as good because of how instantaneous Tergrid is. But a lot of these very, very powerful commanders, these are going to be great against. Let's say you're playing against a Nekusar deck, right? I always bring that one up because that's a really good one to use. In a lot of situations, Nekusar can come down, start going for some wheels, producing extra mana, and keep chaining those wheels together. So being able to deal with Nekusar when it comes down early, I think is going to be very important. And these spells do exactly that. So that's pretty much it for this topic. Anybody else want to add anything before we head out? This Week in MTG says, good point. So if you Ixodron a Tergrid, does it become a 2/2 Tergrid's Lantern? No, it does not. Let me pull up the comprehensive rules here so you can see exactly why that's the case. Ixodron can't flip 2 face cards or tokens face down, says Breffin. That's exactly the case. So if I look up here, face down, I think that will have here. There's a lot of rules here. Let me just keep scrolling through. But yeah, if you have any other things you'd like to add to this conversation, I think we probably hit all the major points. If you're watching this and it's not live, feel free to put a comment down below what you think that we missed talking about. I always like bringing up these comments in later episodes. This is only the second episode, and nobody really commented on the first one, so nothing really to talk about from last week's episode. But there's a lot of things here that I think will be pretty interesting. Yeah, let me see here. Scheme card, command zone. Let me see here. There's 84 matches, so there's a lot here. Let me just see here. Double-sided. Well, anyways, I can't find the rule super quickly here, unfortunately, but Breffin is right. If there's a card that's double-sided, if it would get turned over into a manifested card or a face-down card, like Ixodron says, and because it has another face on the back, it instead nothing will happen to it. It'll just stay face up. So kind of an interesting thing. Tergrid does actually get around Ixodron's ability there. But yes, like I said, I think playing Narset, playing Tergrid, I don't think is a very strategic choice. You can do it if you still want to have fun. You like being the archenemy. I know a lot of players love that. They love, building a deck that's super, super powerful and then playing against opponents where they all have to team up to try to kill that person. And they just love that dynamic, right? Some people love that. Some people don't. But if that's something that you like, then, go ahead. Play Narset, play Tergrid. If you don't like that one, definitely avoid those two because that's going to be the case. And really, in a lot of situations, that's going to be the case with a lot of the top commanders. When a commander becomes super popular, it always feels like that commander has become infamous, and people know how powerful it is. So even though Golos, Atraxa, Muldrotha, they're not necessarily the same as Narset or Tergrid where they can win super quickly, they still generate so much value that you want to try to prevent them from getting to that point, and so you kind of have to kill them before they can do anything scary. Not quite as bad as Tergrid or Narset, but still definitely pretty up there. People are afraid of those commanders. So that's why personally I avoid the top 200 commanders, which sounds like a lot, because you would think that, like, okay, I don't have any more options there. But if I scroll down to the 200 here, Kelsey and the Plague is the 200th commander, Krav and Regnan 201, which is kind of funny because that one I thought about for a while dismantling it because it's too popular, but looks like it's actually below the 200 mark now. But you can see here, I'm only about maybe like a tenth of the way through, because if I scroll down all the way to the bottom, we've got 1,200 decks. So that's only knocking out 1/6 of the options. If you can't find anything else you like out of 5/6 of all commanders, you got some other issues, I think. Reference says turn face down. Yeah, let me look up that. Let me see if I can find that way. Turn face down. So I'm going to go back to the comprehensive rules. I love using Yagatog.com because with their rules, you can actually then click on them and go to other ones. So if I go here to mana, I click on that one. It might have other things in there. Those are also hyperlinked. So it's awesome because you can kind of go through them one rule to the next. So let's look up here. Turn face down. Turn face down. Nope. That one's not coming down here as well either. That's okay though. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this episode. It looks like everybody's kind of said everything they wanted to say or asked everything they wanted to say. So thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Grim Backwoods, the live podcast that I have here on YouTube and on Twitch. For those of you that kind of joined in later, feel free to watch the video once it's uploaded. I usually try to do a couple of edits before I have that video, but you'll see it if you're subscribed to me on YouTube. You'll see it pop up there. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Thank you so much again, and I will see you guys next time. Stay awesome, everybody.